Hello and welcome. So glad to have all of you with us today. I have a great lineup with Jacob Small and Sol Amor. They are going to be talking about generative design, and this is unusual time. I know that you guys aren't used to this time, but I'm so glad that you made the time to come in and listen to us. So before we get started, we're going to give everyone a few more minutes to get logged in and get their computer audio and video, everything set up. So if you could open up the question panel, and let's get used to using that. Go ahead and type in the Q&A panel where you are joining us from. I always find it exciting to see where in the world you are. So David from, looks like Pennsylvania. Excellent, nice to see you. I've got to make this bigger so I can see everyone coming in. Christian from Canada, Steve from Pittsburgh, Hans Rasmussen, nice to see another Rasmussen from Arizona, Trevor from Washington, Dan from Pennsylvania, Sander from New York, Aaron from North Dakota. I spent some time up there in the Air Force. Awesome. Jeff from Seattle, nice to have you. Shikar from Toronto. Sarvesh from Houston. Carlos from Hawaii, nice. Billy from California, nice to have you. Leonardo from New Jersey. Dan from Canada as well, in Ontario, great. Matt from Washington, DC. Juan from Florida. Elsie, it looks like from Philadelphia. Marcos from Vancouver, British Columbia. Raul from Chile. Awesome. So great to have all of you with us. It does look like our numbers are starting to steady off, so I'll go ahead and get started with just some orders of business before I turn it over to Jacob and Sol. And so this is going to be our generative design series. By the way, today we are again talking about generative design, but specifically we're talking about the Dynamo user interface and the library. You can see the series, we started it on September 22nd, and this is our second one. If you missed it on the 22nd, you can always go back and watch the recording. We are recording all of them, and so they will be in a playlist on YouTube available to you. But our next one will be on October 27th. So yeah, that's right. I had to check my dates. I was thinking that was a Monday, but yes, it'll be on a Tuesday in the morning. Those that are on Wednesdays will be the evening in the US time zones, and the ones on Tuesdays will be, did I say that right? Wednesdays are evening and Tuesdays are morning sessions. So keep that in mind as you're registering. Before we begin though, I want to make sure you know the lines are muted because like I said, we are recording these and the recording will go out to everyone who registered. This is so you can rewatch it later, or you can share it with your coworkers, friends, family, whoever you feel would benefit from it. We do have the Q&A panels to encourage you to ask questions during the session, as well as continue the conversation afterwards. We'll have you go out to that forum. Now, I know that that's not clickable on your screen at the moment. I'm going to add that to the chat panel here in a minute so that you can go and click on that and have that available to you. So with that, I think we have definitely leveled off. I am going to turn it over to Jacob and Sol. So let me make sure that you have control of that. Jacob. This is interesting. My audio attendees view went away. Oh, there it's back. Okay, perfect. Okay, Jacob, can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Jacob Small is our designated support specialist, and Sol Amor is our product manager for Dynamo. And so they're going to talk to you, and the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thanks. So welcome everybody. This is the second in the series on the Dynamo office hours. This is focusing on the Dynamo user interface and interactions inside the library, which are kind of the visual components of Dynamo. So as mentioned before, my name is Jacob Small. You can see me on the right on the slide deck there. I am a designated support specialist focusing on generative design and BIM, which is a big, long title, which means I help some of our larger customers, our enterprise priority customers, adopt Dynamo, Revit, generative design for Revit, BIM 360 design, and similar products kind of at a high level.
Cool, and hello everyone, my name is Saul and I'm the product manager for Dynamo. So it's my job to sort of guide the development, the trajectory, the vision, and really Dynamo into the future. And so it's my responsibility to sit at the intersection between sort of business, customer, and developer and designer, and really sort of make Dynamo all that it really can be.
Nice.
So before we go too much further, we have to talk through a safe harbor statement. Basically, what the safe harbor statement says is that do not make any purchasing decisions based on what you see today, albeit Dynamo is free if you have some other Autodesk products already. So this doesn't necessarily apply, but anything that we say in here is going to be around the UI and the library today. So everything is kind of set in stone. This safe harbor statement is usually for more future-looking things, but the safe harbor statement does apply to the conversation that we will have afterwards and the Q&A session as well. Cool. Awesome. So we have a rough agenda today. So the agenda will be, we have one presentation. It's going to take around about 15 minutes. And this is on the UI and the library of Dynamo. Then we're going to open the floor to a Q&A session. And after the Q&A session, if we still have time remaining, we do have a bonus presentation as well that we can run through. Last time we ran this, around about 2 weeks ago, we had one session presented and we had a really good and thorough Q&A session. So we'll see what happens and see what time permits today.
Cool. So wanted to start by giving kind of an overview of all the different parts of the library. Now, there are two different sort of flavors of Dynamo that you may come across in terms of the way the user interface is and library is sort of set up. There's the Dynamo version 1 and Dynamo version 2, so 1.x and 2.x. You'll see the 1.x if you're in Revit 2016 and some of the older builds. If you're in Revit 2017, 18 or 19, you can upgrade to Dynamo 2.0.4, and Revit 2020 and beyond will have the Dynamo 2.x version, depending on which Revit version you have installed. But generally speaking, the older builds will look like this. The newer ones will look like this. The big way to quickly sort of tell, am I in Dynamo 2 or Dynamo 1, is to look at the left-hand side of the user interface right over here, where you'll sort of see some additional sort of graphic indicators in terms of what that content is. So again, the 1, Dynamo 1, and then Dynamo 2. I do recommend sort of staying in Dynamo 2 land as much as possible. There's a whole bunch of great features built in there that you don't have access to if you're in the older version. So quick rundown on what all those different numbers were. Sort of listed out here. We're going to go over each one of these in a little bit more detail, so don't feel like you have to sort of understand them, but just wanted to have something for people to sort of refer back to, because we will have a PDF that you can have a look into after this is all said and done.
Cool, so kicking off, Dynamo is an application or a program, and it has some standard stuff. So inside of that standard stuff, the two that we're calling out here is pretty much your bog standard basics. We have your menu bar, and this is containing your typical stuffs like file, edit, settings, and so on. Depending on what you install through Dynamo, through extensible packages, you may have other menu items that show up in here. If you're familiar with, say, John Pearson's Monocle package, this might show up here with a drop-down menu, or the data shapes package, for example. But typically speaking, this just contains all of the information you need to really customize your Dynamo experience. So we also, underneath the top line, which is the menu, we have the ribbon bar, and the ribbon bar has really basic stuff such as save, open, start a new graph, for example, create new graph, and so on. Really, this is kind of the bog standard basics when it comes to any kind of application. And then, as Jacob mentioned, we have the library, and this underwent a bit of a revamp when we went to the tour environment. You'll notice, as Jacob called out, that we now have some icons in here. Those icons give you an indication of what those kind of nodes will do, which is really useful. And this is where all of the nodes are stored inside of Dynamo. So Dynamo out of the box, if you're using what we call Dynamo Core, has around about 700 different nodes in it. If you're using Dynamo in the Revit context, there's another 700 different nodes. So you're really looking at around about 1,400 different nodes in our most popular use case of Dynamo. So there's a lot of stuff. So these icons really do help. And so the migration from Dynamo 1.x to 2.x was useful in the understandability sector of that Dynamo library. But basically, this is where all of your nodes are stored, and in Dynamo, the nodes are going to do the bulk of the work, and the nodes are what you use to build the graph that does your, or that creates your workflow to do the kind of things that you want Dynamo to do in the first place. So moving on.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jacob. I was going to say, moving on, the subset of this is there is a whole bunch of different nested aspects to the library, and we're going to dive down now to them a little bit further. So Jacob, take it away.
Cool. So as you can see, we've expanded out that first section of the geometry library. The library, the way I like to think of it organized, it's just like your library. If you go back into your local library, there's sections for different types of books, right? You might have the reference section over here, the nonfiction section, the fiction section, so on and so forth. In this case, we've expanded the geometry section. In that geometry section, there's a whole bunch more bookcases, such as our abstract bookcase, a curves bookcase, a meshes bookcase. And then you can go into, in this case, the curves bookcase, and then go into the specific shelf on the curves bookcase and look into, let's say, in this case, arcs, right? So all the books associated with arcs in Dynamo speak, these are the nodes associated to arcs, are all grouped right here. Conveniently, they've got an additional grouping as well that lets us know what type of node that is. So the first type of node that you can see in your library are your constructors. These are the nodes that basically make something where something didn't exist before. It creates something new. The next type of node are your modifiers. These are the ones that modify existing content. So if we had something that was already there, we can sort of modify that content and get a new version of whatever that element was. In this case, we were looking at an arc, so we get a slightly different type of arc. And then the last type is query. This returns information about that specific type of object. So if I'm working with an arc, I can pull out the center point. What's the center point that defines the location of this arc in space? If I wanted to know the radius, I could pull that up. These are indicated by, again, that green plus sign for the construct, and then there's a green line straight down the full length of the construct aspect, a red lightning bolt with, again, a line straight down through the extent of that to indicate the extent of the modify section, and then blue query, which are blue question mark for the query. And then again, that blue line that runs down through the length of that.
Yeah, so these are also somewhat known as sort of creators, actions, and queries, which you might have found if you're reading some of the earlier documentation around Dynamo. But in essence, they allow you to do all of the cool stuff. They allow you to create things, they allow you to change those things, and they allow you to query aspects of those or properties of those to then subsequently use downstream in your workflow. So getting a little bit deeper into the library, if we hover over any of these nodes and any of these creators, actions, or query zones, you get a node description. And this description is a little bit more verbose than you would get on the node itself. And this allows you to understand things such as what is the description? So like, what does this node actually do? You get a larger version of that image, and you get to start understanding what are the inputs and the outputs of that node. And to get a little bit deeper, if you were here from the object types approach that we talked about 2 weeks ago, the previous presentation that we gave, this also starts to talk about the kind of information or the kind of data that that node requires coming into its inputs and the kind of data that it's going to set out from its output at the tail end as well. So there's also 2 different ways to play with the library. One of them is you can just sort of expand these collapsible sections and just follow your nose and try and find the kind of node that makes sense. So if you know you want to work with geometry, you can go into the geometry section and start following your way down to, say, an arc or a circle or a cuboid or some T-spline funky geometry. But you can also search. So if you had some form of keyword and you wanted to understand, hey, I'm looking for an arc, you could simply type an arc and it would start bringing up every single node that either contains arc as its category type, that contains arc and its name or description or metadata. And so search deals with multiple different layers, and adding more information into your search panel will bring you closer towards the node that you're looking for. And the best way to approach using search in its current iteration is to type in the node name as it is appropriately typed. We are planning on doing some improvements to search in the future to try and make this an easier experience as well.
It's also possible to filter through. Once you start to sort of zone in on your search, you can limit which sections of the library that you want to look through. So in this case, if I was looking to work with arcs, I might want to start by limiting to just the geometry category, or maybe I want to exclude, let's say, the genus Loki package. It's quick enough to basically do that by clicking this little filter icon and then just checking off the ones that we want to use. Or if you want to use only a particular section, if you hover over the section in that filter list, it will pop up with a little button that'll say only, which will allow you to just sort of focus in on the one particular section of the library that you want to search through. It's also possible to quickly change through to a compact or detailed view of the library in your search by clicking that little button right over there. I personally prefer to leave it in the detailed when I'm using that search. It just gives me a little bit more context to make sure that I'm getting the information that I'm really after. One other thing that I wanted to point out here, and you can see it highlighted where it says ARC, I've put that extra little orange box right there. If you click on that, that's actually a hyperlink in your library, and it'll bring you back to the ARC bookshelf, right? So it'll bring us all the way back to show us all the nodes that are associated with ARC. So if you're working with ARCs and you're getting kind of close to the type of nodes you might want, but maybe not exactly what it is that you're after, it often helps to go to that section of the library and just sort of see what nodes do I have in this area, whether you're working with arcs or whether you're working for, something more complicated, like let's say Revit roof objects and stuff like that. Getting into the specific groupings of nodes that are associated with that content can really help expedite the time it takes to find that piece that you're after.
Yeah, and one further thing when it comes to the library itself is there is a couple of different sections. So in the library, we have an out-of-the-box section. So these are the nodes that we as Autodesk provide with Dynamo, with your install, that comes with every single Dynamo install. And then you have the ability to sort of customize your installation, and that is through downloading packages. So community members, yourself, if you wish to in the future as well, can create a package where you build your own kind of like functionality. So maybe you like arcs, but you build something that goes and slices those arcs into particular subsets, and you want to share that with someone else, you can. And you can send that off through the package manager, which we'll cover in a later date. But what that will show up in the library is there is basically a divider halfway down. And that divider is going to be called add-ons, which is another way to basically load libraries. And underneath that is all of those packages that come from the community. So in this case, if you see on screen, there's things such as Clockwork or Genius Loci, or Dynamo Text, and so on. And some of these packages that we actually ship ourselves as Autodesk, so we kind of eat our own dog food. And so Dynamo Text is a package that we have made. We've also made some cool stuff around TuneUp, which is another extension to help you understand how long your graph takes to execute, and so on and so forth. And those will all show up down there in that section, or if they're an extension, as I mentioned earlier, they might show up in different places of the UI, a la the menu item at the top.
Cool.
So after covering the library, it's pretty straightforward. The library contains all of the content, and Jacob has explained pretty in depth and with pretty nice analogies how to sort of like navigate through that using those hyperlinks and using those filter features, the compact mode or the verbose mode. The other major component piece of Dynamo is this, and this is the workspace. So this is really where you get stuff done. And so in the workspace, we have two different primary modes. One of those is the node view mode, and that is where you're going to build your graph. So this is where you're going to place your nodes. This is where you're going to wire up the nodes, where you're going to basically collect things at the front end, you're going to do something to it in the middle, and then you're going to have a result at the end. Whether or not you push that result back to Revit, or whether or not you leave that in Dynamo, maybe you push something to Excel. Typically, graphs will follow that kind of sort of collect, change, and create sector. And beyond the nodal workspace view, there is also the background 3D preview. So if you see on your screen right now, we have some geometry in the background. And that is a separable mode, which is accessible in the upper right corner. We'll get to that in a second. You can also use the escape key to sort of toggle between these. It's a little keyboard shortcut that helps inside of the Dynamo ecosystem. So in this kind of like nodal interface, there is 4 different sort of primary pieces of this puzzle. So we have obviously the nodes themselves, and this is where you have either sort of really granular functionality or functions, or you have really like powerful, like aggregate functions that do a whole bunch of different things. And then inside of those nodes, the ability for data to flow through a Dynamo graph happens through these things called connectors, or otherwise known as wires. And so if a node has a wire coming into it, it's going to receive data from that node upstream, And if a node has wire coming out of it or a connector coming out of it, it's going to push data downstream through that. We'll get to sort of like graph flow in a later sort of presentation. Inside of this space, we also have two other things, which are kind of like documentation or annotation features. We have the ability to group sets of nodes together, and that's what you see with the green on your screen right now. We also have the ability to add notes or customized annotation to that graph. And notes and nodes can also be grouped into the groups and move around together. You have the ability to sort of like use features like the automatic layout tool to sort of reorganize those in a clean and concise way as well.
After getting through the workspace, we probably want to look at being able to run the graph, right? And that's what we're showing right down here, down at the bottom. There are 3 different primary run modes within Dynamo. The first one is automatic, the second one is manual, and the third one is periodic. And you might want to switch between these different versions depending on what type of graph it is that you're working with and what type of data it is that you're executing. In particular, automatic is the default. It's how you're going to start up. Basically, what that is anytime there's a change to the Dynamo graph, Dynamo is going to sense that, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to execute any nodes that have changed. This can sometimes introduce sort of infinite loops if it's sort of querying changes to the Revit document early in the graph, making a change to the Revit document, which means, oh, the query in the beginning now has sensed a new change. So you do want to be really careful about that. And that's why specifically when you're first getting started with the Revit interaction, you might want to change that over in the manual. So if you hit the little down button that's sort of down here in the lower right-hand corner, you can click that and then switch that over to manual. Once you do, you'll see a little run button that'll show up sort of in between these 2 orange boxes. And that run button will allow you to basically choose when to execute the graph. At that point, any node that has changed, any node that has new data into an input will re-execute, and you'll get, when you hit the run button, and then you'll get new results out of the output. The last run mode is periodic. Periodic mode basically does what it sounds like. It runs a graph periodically. Give it a value in milliseconds. I think the default is about 1,000 milliseconds, so 1 second, and it will execute that graph basically every second, which is pretty cool. In order to enable that, though, you do first have to put one of the specific nodes that have a periodic state to it. Probably the most common of these would be the datetime.now. That will enable that feature to be there, and you'll basically get a new time from that datetime now every time the graph runs periodically. The other thing that we're pointing out down here is the status message. This is where you want to look anytime things are executing, anytime things feel like they're locked up. If you see nodes like running ... that means Dynamo's actively thinking and executing that data that's been given. Typically, if I feel like it's been there for a while, I'll stand up, go get myself a cup of coffee, something like that, come back, and happily enough, it's often done. Other times it's got a little bit longer to work with, but it's definitely worth giving it a little bit extra if you just feel like things are just stuck. As long as that says it's running, it's good to go. If you are in a Revit interaction, though, you may want to check to see if you've got an active Revit command, because Dynamo can't actually finish its execution while a Revit command's active. So just pop over into the Revit as opposed to the Dynamo section, and just make sure you didn't like start drawing a line or something like that by accident, or go into family edit mode, which will again prevent Dynamo from executing. Another common message that you might see down here is run completed, which is what's highlighted in this case. That basically means Dynamo, all the nodes that were given data, were able to successfully execute with that data, produce a result, and pass that on to the next node. More or less, Dynamo didn't see any problems when it ran the graph. Sounds like it's really good. I do still recommend checking out sort of the results. Did you get what you thought you would get? Is the Revit model in the status that you thought it would be? Just, trust but verify. And then the last message that you often see down there is something like run completed with warnings, right? And then that's, it sounds bad. It's not necessarily bad, but it does mean you want to take a step back and look for warnings and errors that may have happened within the graph, and make sure that they're not actually throwing bad data further downstream.
Yeah, and one additional point is back to the periodic mode, which is kind of like a little bit of a hidden node. Like Jacob said, you have to place special nodes in the graph to even access that mode, like some web request nodes or the datetime now node. Be careful when you set the periodic run for that. So if you run your graph and you use, say, tune up to understand, oh, my graph takes like 3 seconds to run, and you have that periodic mode set at 1 second to execute, you're going to run into an infinite loop. And that means that Dynamo is going to start executing the graph, and then it's going to try and re-execute that graph 1 minute into your 3-second runtime. Therefore, it's going to simply queue up another run, and you're going to kind of have to crash out of Dynamo because it's not really going to go anywhere, and you're going to sit there forever if you try to wait for it to finish, because it wouldn't. So just be careful about periodic mode. Typically, it's really safe to just bump that up hugely, or to, like I said, use TuneUp, which is a profiling extension we created on the package manager. And that means that you can understand how long your graph takes to run. So you do it one time in manual mode, you say, cool, I understand how long this is going to take. I'm going to give myself a buffer of like 5 seconds or 10 seconds, just in case. And then you can use periodic mode in that kind of context in a little safer way.
Cool. Next up are tabs. Tabs allow you to switch between your active DYN workspace and any custom nodes that you may have access to at the same time. We'll talk more about what custom nodes are in a later session, but more or less it's a collection of nodes that you've grouped together to basically enable better graph organization, faster runtimes, distribution of stuff, or maybe it's just something that you do often and you don't want to have to place 10 nodes, you'd rather just place 1. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons that you might want to have those custom nodes, and you can be in as many custom nodes as you may want at the same time, but only one active DYN workspace at a time. This stems more or less from the interaction with Revit. It's only going to allow one set of hooks into it at a time, but it is, again, possible that if you sort of wanted to be able to see multiple sets at the same time, you can always go back, make your entire graph a DYN by just renaming the extension, making some other modification, creating a custom node from the entire piece, open that custom node, and then go into the graph that you might want to see side by side.
One other thing to note on tabs is sometimes you'll notice there's a little asterisk at the end of whatever your graph name is, and that simply means that the graph is in an unsaved state. So if you see the asterisk, you might want to go and click save if you want to keep the functionality, just in case something goes wrong. You know, technology is technology at the end of the day.
Good call.
Right, so if we move on now, we have another interesting feature here, and this is the camera export feature. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see right now, highly called out with export as image and covered in orange. It's a little icon for a camera, and this is really, really useful. So what this does is allows you to basically capture an image of your Dynamo workspace, and this works in both the nodal base state and the background preview or the geometry space as well. And if you want to capture this, there's one or two sort of caveats to it, which basically means if you want to capture your entire graph, the natural inclination might be to zoom out and take a capture like you see on screen right now, but that might not necessarily be legible. The way the camera actually works is if you have to zoom into a state that you want it to take at the resolution that you want. So in this case, you'd probably zoom into, say, the center node to a reasonably high resolution and use that camera to export your entire graph. And you might not actually see everything on your screen at the same time, but that export as image feature will be taking a snapshot of your entire graph. So never fear, it'll all be there. And that allows you to share this on, say, the Dynamo forums or with your colleagues if you're trying to ask for questions or you're trying to take some form of sort of like, you know, your own, say, personal library of graphs to save in graphical form for the future. And so bear in mind that the zoom feature works for geometry as well. So you can take both images from both your nodal space or your geometry space, and for those who are super adventurous, you can also tap into this through an extension to automate this process if you wish as well.
Cool.
And moving on to the final kind of state when it comes to the Dynamo interface is this is again calling out those kind of two different node states. So we have the background preview mode and we have the sort of nodal space, which we've been talking about mostly today. Like I said earlier, you can either toggle between these by clicking on those two icons in the upper right-hand corner of the workspace. You can also hold down the escape key, which is the inbuilt keyboard shortcut, to temporarily go into your background preview, which is a nice way when you're building a graph to sort of like just quickly navigate, get a better angle for the geometry that you're creating, for example. And then we also have workspace navigation. So the icons that are vertically centered underneath those upper right ones is the workspace navigation. And bear in mind, these are slightly different between both work states. So within the background preview state, you'll also get the orbit function and orbit feature. If you work like me on a Mac and Parallels and you don't really have a middle mouse button, this can be super handy and super useful. This also gives you the ability to zoom to fit. So the top icon on that, which has got like is this square, the corners of the square, this allows you to zoom to fit in both the geometry preview in the background or the node state, which is really nice. Some cool little features here as well is if you select a node or a subset of nodes, so maybe you drag select some of those and you use zoom to fit, it's only going to zoom to fit on that subset as well. So you have a little bit of like granularity or the ability to play with what you want to zoom in at any point in time as well.
Cool. All right, we are into the question state. Whoop, I did not mean to skip through all those nodes. Sorry about the slides. Sorry about that, guys. I guess we'll start grabbing questions from the Q&A. Let me make this nice and big so I can actually read it.
So Dan asked the question, can you do vocab for dummies tonight? So hopefully that was good enough, Dan. Let us know.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Actually, it's the sort of thing we might, it might make a good introduction on a primer or a good AU course someday. But we'll see if we can put something together because obviously, you know, as we go, there's going to be new vocab added. It might be, maybe it's something to add, you know, what does the word mean perhaps in at the end of the coming sessions. But that's a great idea and definitely something that I think there's some value in. So I'll see if I can cook up some ideas to find a time and place to do something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd also add, Dan, if there's anything that we've said today that doesn't make sense to you, please like post that in the chat as well. And we're more than happy to clarify any particular nomenclature or jargon that we might have used to describe how Dynamo does things or functions.
Absolutely. All right, and Christian is asking, where do main Dynamo updates come from? Is it the Autodesk desktop app?
So this is an interesting one. So like Jacob alluded to it earlier, Dynamo comes in different flavors and in different ways. So if you're talking about the Revit experience, we had the Dynamo 1.x series. This was available up until 2016, or Revit 2016. Then we got into the Dynamo 2.x series, which was basically like a revamp fundamentally on how the file format worked. And this was preparation for future work on web content, as well as, you know, revamp of the library and a bunch of other changes, which are really good. And so Dynamo allowed you to install your own chosen version in a Revit version up until Revit 2019. So in Revit 2019, you could choose to install any of the Dynamo 2.0 series, 2.0 up to 2.04. And the way the numbers work is a little bit finicky, but basically there's a major version at the front, which is the 2, and then the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on is kind of like the minor versions where we release new functionality. And then the final point in that is like bug fixes and slight improvements to say the way memory is allocated or handled in the application. And the Dynamo updates themselves, so the Dynamo team builds the updates and they ship them out via these installers up until Revit 2019. If you're using Revit 2020 or 2021, those are actually then natively installed inside of Revit now. So you no longer have to manage that install process yourself. If you're using a particular version of Revit, every single other user who's using that version of Revit will be on the same Dynamo version. So we've taken away the need for you to manage that, and that means there's going to be more consistency for you as an end user. It also means that we can now sort of better test Dynamo against the other aspects of the Revit ecosystem. It means that it's more stable, more robust, and over time is going to be in a much better place than it currently is. So if you want to take it to sort of like the basics, if you're up until Revit 2019, you as the user choose to install. You get capped at certain versions. In the primer, there is actually a page that tells you what versions are applicable to which Revit install. And if you're from Revit 2020 onwards, you no longer have to manage that. You get to use the Dynamo version that is in there, and that will be updated with every single Revit release. So Revit 2020 will have Dynamo 2.5, Revit 2021 has Dynamo 2.6, and so on and so forth. If you're using Dynamo in another context, say Format or Civil 3D or Alias, they do handle it in a slightly different way. And so you can install for Format, you get it done by the Format team, so you get a particular version for the particular Format version. For Alias and Civil 3D, you will do that through the manage.autodesk.com ecosystem. So I guess the short answer is there's a little bit of a nuance to that. The Dynamo Primer will help you in the Revit context if that's your specific domain.
Yep.
Excellent. And Christian is asking another question. With regards to the packages through Dynamo, what are your stances on the security risk of people downloading non-trusted packages?
Right. So the package manager has the package manager is kind of like use at your own risk. That's the community can upload anything that they wish there under whatever license they choose. And the package manager itself is like it's kind of like a user beware. That being said, like there is a certain amount of like community vetting that happens. So the most popular downloaded packages have been around a very long time. They're highly trustworthy and a lot of people do use them. Some firms and some people may choose not to use the package manager because they do care more about the potential risk for security. Other people will allow sort of certain packages to be used on non-specific projects. It's kind of completely up to you. But as Autodesk, we don't take responsibility for what gets put up onto the package manager. So we don't personally do any security vetting when it comes to that. It is a buyer beware situation.
Yeah. And I'll add into that, you know, the security of Dynamo, yeah, there's code in there, but if you've ever downloaded a DWG off the internet or an Excel file off the internet, or basically if you've gone online, there's risk to that too. More or less, I wouldn't recommend saying we're going to lock down the capability for people to use this just because we're concerned about the security risk. Instead, take active security precautions like you would any other aspect of your InfoSec.
Okay, excellent. James is asking if Dynamo crashes, does Revit crash?
Oh boy.
Okay, so yes. Short answer is yes, and I'll give you the reason for that. So Dynamo itself is actually multi-threaded. If anyone's familiar with what threading is, that allows you to have multiple different parts of Dynamo working simultaneously or in parallel. So for example, if you take Dynamo Sandbox, which is like our core application, you get to be able to play in the UI as the graph is running. So you can keep making changes in the UI as the graph is executing. In the context of Revit, Revit is what we call like in process or single threaded. And that means that Dynamo is working inside of Revit and it's going to be in what's called this idle thread, which means if Dynamo crashes inside of that Revit thread, unfortunately Revit will crash as well. So this is why we sort of advocate some safety precautions when it comes to using sort of exploratory or experimental graphs, like I mentioned with the periodic mode. Definitely take some precautions and run in like a little test graph if you're building something really serious. If you're playing around, do use the manual mode. That typically gets you around quite a lot of the issues that you would run into as a new user in Dynamo and alleviate some of those crash situations before they arise. But if Dynamo does crash, yes, as it stands, because of the way that Revit is single threaded and in process, it will unfortunately crash Revit as well.
Yeah. One thing I will add, if Dynamo causes Revit to crash, Revit will crash too. A lot of times I find that the same graph that feels sort of very unstable in Revit, if I remove the Revit interaction and do the unstable stuff just in regular Dynamo Sandbox, runs like clockwork every time. So you got to be real sort of cognizant of how you're pushing Revit while you're interacting as well.
Okay, great. Andrea asked the question, what if I have a problem with Dynamo script? Where should I ask for help?
The forum.
Yeah, the forum is the best place for that. We have a really engaged community which post a lot of really awesome solutions to a lot of problems. So either you can go there and search for the answer, and chances are likely someone's asked the same question or a similar question beforehand. And if not, simply I'd advocate go and post something. There's a lot of people out there who are really willing to help. You know, case in point, Jacob spends a huge degree of his day perusing that space, and I spend a reasonable amount of mine. And there's a lot of people who are just really willing to help, and you'll get really interesting solutions to your problem space as well. And people typically spend a lot of their own personal free time and go above and beyond in being super helpful to other people starting their Dynamo journey.
Yeah, that community, the Dynamo community is a huge aspect of sort of the benefit of leveraging Dynamo between both the package manager side and the forum side. People are out here willing to help each other out. Total strangers, people you've never met before, will come in and solve problems for you that, you know, you might be spending days, hours, months on a project trying to solve. So definitely check that out first. Just the two things I will ask, if you do have a question that you want to post, we need a basic data set so that we can recreate it. I don't know how you built your Revit model. If I guess at it, I'm likely going to guess wrong. So if it interacts with a Revit model in some way, if it needs a particular set of family parameters associated to a family, I need a model that has that. Otherwise, you know, a question that we could answer in 5 minutes becomes a 1 hour investment in time in trying to figure out, wait, how was that set up? Was it a shared parameter, type parameter, so on and so forth. The other thing, make sure you have a good example of the graph in its current state, as well as an image showing what the graph is looking like in your UX. So use that little camera export button up in the right-hand corner, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Let's move to a verbal question. So Don Luther has his hand up. Don, I'm going to open up your line, and it looks like you're self-muted. Are you able to speak with us? Don?
Sorry.
Hey, there you are. Excellent. Ask your question.
No, I didn't have a question. I don't know how. Sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna lower your hand then, if that's all right. If you do have questions and you feel like you want to ask them live, you can raise your hand in the attendee panel. Otherwise, you're welcome to keep asking those questions in the Q&A panel. So let's go to Stephen then. Stephen asks, are there any plans to certify packages or verify security of the packages?
As it stands right now, no. As Autodesk, we're not going to build a framework or take the responsibility of those packages, because there is a lot of packages on there and people build these and change these on a daily basis. So like I said earlier, it is akin to what Jacob mentioned. Like if you're using the internet, it's the same amount of risk. If somebody wanted to put something in there, they could, but at the same time, if you've got a package that's got 100,000 downloads, that's highly unlikely. So one safe way to use the package manager, if you want to, is just to simply like search or filter by the most downloaded and just go through the list of the top 10 to 20 most downloaded packages, because there will be a bunch of other people who've gone and basically done that vetting for you in the first place. If you have a large firm who's really worried about security, then you can potentially get a BIM manager who knows about these things, or your IT team, to investigate, and they can do their own kind of testing on those packages as well and basically vet them and make sure that they're safe for consumption. From my experience, I have not come across anything that has been malicious inside of the Dynamo ecosystem myself at all, ever. That's not to say that there's not anything on there, but it is highly unlikely.
Okay, excellent. And Elise asks, I've had trouble searching nodes, and sometimes you have to put in a space and sometimes not. Is there any rule or advice in searching nodes that would be more accurate?
Right, so first of all, big apologies for that, Elise, and to anyone else. We are fully aware that search needs some improvements. It is on our radar and we're actively talking about it right now. And the biggest sort of reason for that is that it's currently a little bit inconsistent. So like sometimes putting a space or sometimes using a period, depending on the way the name is, of the name of the node, comes across, will be helpful for that particular node case. But what we're looking to do is try and make that full experience way more consistent for users and also way more intuitive. So right now there is a bunch of different ways that nodes sort of express themselves inside of Dynamo. So not to get too technical, but there is sort of like out-of-the-box nodes, custom nodes. There's some nodes you build with C#, there's nodes that have UI componentry, and they all kind of behave in slightly different ways. So part of this work we need to do is really unify the way that these nodes express themselves in the back end. So it's not going to be something you're necessarily going to see a change from, but it should result in the ability for us to improve and fix search. So like I said, actively talking about this and trying to make search much better than it currently is.
Yeah, and there are a few other things that you can do within the search. Like I mentioned before, use the filters, zero in on the particular section of the library where you think stuff might want to be as you're searching through. That way you don't see, a million nodes from 10 different custom packages that are going to produce data that might be in conflict with each other. The other thing that you can do, like I said before, is go in and click and go to that particular section of the library and see what other nodes you have in that area, so that you are looking at those associated sets of data. Otherwise, to your point, it might be a little bit confusing in terms of what those results are. Generally speaking, you can get pretty close and then expand it the rest of the way through with those little tips.
Okay, great. And John asked the question, can you provide links to help beginners to understand how we can use Dynamo within Revit on real projects? And I've put a post in the answer in there to go and check out the learning courses that we have on customersuccess.autodesk.com. Under our architectural discipline, we have a learning challenge for generative design that does walk you through that. You use our data sets, our files, so that you can practice using them. But maybe Jacob or Saul, can you think of other places that might be good to look?
The Dynamo primer. All right, that's where I tell everybody to start. If you're looking to learn Dynamo, go through the Dynamo primer, start at exercise 1, go all the way through, don't skip any pages. If you're looking at it, let's say you're a plumbing engineer, you're like, I'm never gonna have to work with an exterior massing like this. It's not about working with exterior massing, it's about learning the particular content that's associated with creating that exterior massing, right? So learn the methods, not the results by going to those. And you typically get a really good direction in terms of how to work with the application that way.
I love it. Teach them to fish, not give them a fish, right?
For sure. And I'd just like to add to that, that if you go to the Dynamo website, which is just dynamobim.com, there's also a page called Learn. And on that Learn page, it does have a link to the Dynamo primer. It has a link to the Dynamo dictionary as well, which is basically a repository for every single node. So any node that you'll find out of the box, and all of the Revit nodes as well, will live there, and will tell you exactly how that can plug into other nodes. So basically how to make that one node successful. The primer will start working through the concepts, like Jacob said, and teach you ideas on how to sort of work with data, how to manipulate data, and how to build successful graphs. But if you're sort of a more visual person and you want to play around with video, we also have video content. And that video content is narrated by John Pearson, who is a well-known user in the Dynamo community. We redid those videos for the 2.x environment around about a year and a half ago. And those are living on that Dynamo BIM Learn page as well. So one thing to take note with those videos is there's 2 sets of them. So one of them is is the introduction videos, and they have both the 1.x and the 2.x environment to learn from, because they are different. And then the other one is there's some more advanced videos, and those only are still in the 1.x environment. We haven't updated those as it stands right now. And one other thing to add, on this one is the AU is also a really, really good place to go and learn content. So AU is free this year. If anyone has not yet signed up to go, please do. There's a bunch of different awesome things that happen at AU, and there's a lot of really cool Dynamo courses as well. But you can also just search on the AU site and look at sort of AUs of the past, AU being Autodesk University, sorry for anyone who doesn't know the acronym. And you can search for a bunch of different Dynamo things. So from last year, the year before, and so on. And we also have ran workshops historically on the Monday before Autodesk University, and that content is also available through that website.
Excellent. All right, and by the way, this year Autodesk University is completely free, so get registered.
Agreed.
All right, and Gilbert actually asked the question, are there examples for setting up shared parameters with multiple families? So I'm assuming, Gilbert, you mean that through Dynamo.
Yeah, so there are many different ways to tackle this particular problem. What I recommend is step out of the family environment for a minute, bring the families you want to modify into the project environment, and then there's a package, I believe it's Dyna MEP. I was just playing with this earlier today, and it will allow you to associate those parameters inside the family documents that are in the project. But again, that's one of those questions that's sort of perfectly primed to go, put together what it is that you're after, get a good understanding of it, search the Dynamo form. If you get something that's halfway there, go ahead and ask, and community member will come along to help you out as soon as they can.
Excellent. And this is a really great question. Tina asks, any good documentation for deploying Dynamo to multiple computers, including packages and user profiles?
Hairy question, cool. So we have no active documentation that shows this, but many users have done this themselves through, say, the copying of Dynamo packages at machine startup by running a routine on every single machine before you can have the network location for packages is somewhat tricky, because sometimes you lose connection and things get into a weird state. So Like the most reliable way that users have done this, and you know, a lot of sort of the high-powered firms in London, for example, Grimshaw and so on, have basically robo-copied all of those packages from a central location from, say, the BIM manager's machine, who does this vetting process and makes sure it's secure and useful, and a machine startup for every single user of Revit and Dynamo. They basically just robo-copy those packages to that location using a script. And so that is a really robust and workable process that could really solve the kind of problem you're looking to, Talia.
Okay. Andre asked the question, multiple tabs in Dynamo, how does it work? Are you able to open multiple scripts at the same time?
So it's one DYN at a time, but you can have multiple custom node DYF open at the same time. So you can only actively run one graph at the same time, but you can review the content that's in those custom nodes and edit those custom nodes, load them in, or copy content out of them into your active workspace as needed.
Yeah, so we don't currently have support for multiple tabs, so multiple DYN files. There's a bit of work that we need to do to understand, like, you know, for example, if you have multiple tabs open and they're all running in automatic mode, what one executes first if they're touching the same stuff? You know, there's kind of like a series of issues that are resultant in that kind of space, especially in, say, the Revit space with the, you know, we discussed about infinite loops and the ability to crash Dynamo, and then if Dynamo crashes, Revit crashes. The ability to kind of mess that up if you've got multiple tabs is quite high. So historically, the choice was made to only have one, given that Dynamo really started inside of Revit. Now exists in many different places like Format and Civil 3D and Alias and so on. We are thinking about revisiting that, but we need to be very careful about how we approach that, because the last thing we want to do is to create an unstable state that just causes the crashing of Dynamo over and over again, or the ability for people to get to that place really easily. And unfortunately, you know, as it stands right now, we think it's much safer to have a single file. But there's a couple of, you know, depending on what you want to do with tabs, if you want to basically copy content from different graphs, if you're in the same Dynamo, you open up a graph, you do Control-C on a bunch of different nodes, you exit out of that graph and you open up a new one. You can still Control-V and paste them if you're in the same kind of environment, the same Dynamo session. So there's ways around it depending on what you're actually looking to do by having multiple tabs. It just takes a little bit more thought from our perspective if we're going to go down that path of enabling multiple different tabs. So we also need to sort of think about, like, what is the benefit of doing that, and what is the actual desire to having multiple tabs? Because if it is the ability to, say, transfer information from one graph to another, then there's maybe other ways that we can do that better. If it's because you want to run sequential graphs inside of Revit, for example, and say, hey, we want to take these 5 graphs and just run them in sequence, then there's other ways to do that as well that are going to be a lot safer than having multiple tabs.
Okay. James is asking, can Dynamo generate a dynamic legend?
Yes and no. It depends on how you've got your graph set up, right? So if your graph is set up to automatically read, hey, this thing changed, right? The source data changed. It's an automatic run mode, and then basically write the data out to the legend that you're after, sure. If you want to periodically grab that or grab it on demand, absolutely. But for true dynamic, like, hey, the Revit file changed, update the legend, that's again going to be one of those things. If the graph's in automatic run mode and it senses a change in the document, yeah, it would be dynamic. But again, it's going to require the Dynamo's open and running constantly on everybody who's running that system. So usually you're better off stepping slightly away from the dynamic and saying, hey, we're going to be printing in about 45 minutes. Let's update our legends and run the graph, perhaps through Dynamo, perhaps through Dynamo Player, that updates your legend to the right sort of status.
Okay, great. And this is the last one on the list, and I see we're getting low on time. So if you do have any other questions, make sure you get those in before we run out of time. Lauren asked the question, hi guys, thanks for all you do. Are there any plans to regulate the package search feature? I like how it is fairly organic, but sometimes there's barely any description, node list, or even a title. Maybe have a best practices. It's a little frustrating to search for a node, but instead get random stuff.
Lauren, would you be willing to talk live on this one? I'm curious to ask a few more questions. If not, it's totally cool, by the way. You don't have to.
Yeah, let me find her. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
She raised her hand.
Oh, she raised her hand. That's why she moved on me. Perfect. Yay. But it won't let me find her again. Technology. We love it, right? Okay. All right. Lauren, I've opened up your line. Are you able to speak with us?
Hey, fellas, how you guys doing?
Yeah, good.
Very good.
Nice to meet you, Lauren.
Yes, we've actually corresponded on the forum, so you guys have helped me out a lot.
Awesome.
I'm one of the people who are trying to translate CAD files into Brevit models, so lots of fun, having a blast. So, do you have questions? I mean, I can go into.
Yeah, I do. So I guess you say you like how it's fairly organic, but sometimes it's a little frustrating to search for node because you get random stuff. I guess like if you're searching in the library, they're all nodes. I'm curious as to what you mean by random stuff. You mean like nodes that are not useful to what you're searching for, or something else?
I'm talking about the package search, not the library.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so the package search, not the node library search. Right. So in the package manager, there is a lot of stuff, and the way the terms and conditions are set up means that when everything is up there kind of forever, unless somebody specifically requests to take it down. So you'll notice there's probably a lot of, like, if you search for test inside of the package manager, you're going to come up with about 1,000 different test packages when people have just been playing around. So that means that, yes, there's a lot of stuff in there. What we did do is we added another filter to the package manager around about 2.2 release of Dynamo. But that means that like the package manager is not tethered to a Dynamo release. It means that that's actually just there. And providing a package author has used that, it should help you understand whether or not that package is, say, for Revit or Civil 3D or all of the kind of like hosts that we have. So you could start by using that. I would also suggest that you search or you rank your search results by, say, the most downloaded. So that'll get rid of some of these test packages. There's a couple of different tactics. You can filter and search by a couple of different metrics that should hopefully start to help. And then it kind of depends what you're looking for as well. Like we need to do work on the package manager, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't enable you to search to a really granular level. Like we don't have, say, tags. We have like some descriptions, some text, and a few keywords and things. But we don't allow you to say, like, I'm an engineer and I care about electrical stuff really deeply, and I just want to search for anything that has the tag of electrical because I know that package is going to help me out. So we have a little bit of work to do to try and improve the package manager to make it more useful for you to search the right kind of stuff. We've made one or two tracks, one or two steps in the right direction with this package filter feature that can hopefully start helping you right here and now. But there is the intention as well in the future to improve this experience and make it better for all of you.
Great, I'm glad you're going the right direction. I mean, if you, I've called it up right now, and the first package is custom one.
Yeah, so that's a time sequential or hierarchical based on when that package was uploaded by default. So that means that like custom one was the last package that has been uploaded to the package manager. Hence why I suggest using the sorting mechanisms as like your default state.
Fair enough. All right, thank you, sir.
No worries. Hope it helps.
All right, so we do have these links as well, which you can come back and refer to after the fact. Again, the Dynamo Primer is noted on there, the Dynamo Form, all sorts of other great resources. We talked about these in a little bit more depth at the last session. So hopefully we don't have to dive too deeply into them. And beyond that, I think that was pretty much everything from me. Anything else to wrap up with, Sol?
No, that's a lot, but thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you turning up and listening to us ramble on for around about an hour and answer a few questions and things. This series is ongoing, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to have another presentation. We're going to jump into the anatomy of a node and start to explore what a node is, what it means, how wires work and connect, and we're basically building up a vocabulary of Dynamo. So Julie noted that we should have a vocabulary of terminology, but these series are supposed to build basically a library of content that should help you understand in a more nuanced way all of the building blocks and the pieces of Dynamo moving forward. And we're going to get to a place where we sort of track and travel through the vast majority of concepts that tackle sort of Dynamo by default, and then move into the generative space as well. So to be successful inside of, say, generative design as it stands right now, you need to have a foundational sort of understanding of Dynamo, because regenerative design runs on Dynamo graphs as the backend feature. So once again, thank you all so much for joining. Really appreciate your time and effort, and please do come along to the next one.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Make sure you get registered. And again, October 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific in the Americas, and everyone is welcome. Take care, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.